No, in a way, I think I would. I don't know. I think that a lot of these organizations are actually faux libertarians. They're not really libertarian, as you were saying, because they're all about subsidies. I mean, look at the Koch brothers. You can't really call them libertarian because they're taking all of these subsidies, oil subsidies and whatnot, and exploiting everything they can to get more and more money. Now,
But at the
that
same time,
really isn't
libertarians
libertarian.
are corporatist because they are not in favor of any sort of corporate regulation. Most of them that I've ever talked to don't want any sort of regulation. They want corporations to be able to basically regulate and police themselves,
Yeah,
and they want the government to be as minimal as possible so that they don't have the power to do any of that stuff anyway.
Yeah, can you really? I mean, you could make an argument that just wanting to get rid of all regulation is corporatist, because who benefits the most? Corporations.
Well, corporations benefit the most from our current regulatory position. Look at any regulatory board. They're controlled by the industry that regulates them. The FDA is controlled by Monsanto.
And that's a failure. That's a failure of the regulatory process.
It's
not actually a failure of the idea of regulating corporations. It's actually because the corporations have found a way to come and take over and to put themselves into those positions so that they can rule. They can basically set rules in their favor.
Right, that's not a failure of regulation as a concept. This is a failure of how they operate. Yeah.
But everything sounds good in concept, but if it literally can't be done. Like, the power to regulate the economy is the power to pick winners and losers. It's the most valuable thing that a corporation can buy.
The reason it's not working, though, is because of corporate greed and corporate corruption and a corporate hand inside the corporate regulatory system. There shouldn't be a corporate hand inside the government or the regulatory systems. The problem is that the two systems are not maintained separately. They are completely intertwined, so that corporations are already policing themselves. That's the problem.
All right, Dan, go ahead.
Well, a lot of libertarians, when you go to speak to them, they talk a lot about self-governance, self-regulation, until it gets to a point when you start talking to them about pollution in the water supply and etc. And then some of them you can get them to a conversation where they talk about, then the people would just revolt and eventually physically harm or punish the person that pollutes the water. And I said, well, then how many times is this going to have to take before you put in regulation to? By then, your water supply is already contaminated. And then
by then the damage is already done. There are no preventative measures in place to prevent this sort of thing from happening.
Then they talk about having limited regulation.
Most libertarians were actually in favor of the EPA. They're in favor of regulating externalities like pollution.
Depends how far. It depends, where they are in the spectrum of libertarian, more of the left.
Right. It all depends on who you talk to, because I think there's several different degrees of libertarianism. You can't you're not, you can be a left libertarian, you can be a right libertarian.
It also has a lot to do with
how much.
It also has a lot to do with how much thought one gives to it. It also has a lot to do with one's intellect. A lot of libertarians of of lower intellect, their mentality is that they hate the system so much that it's, instead of trying to dissect it, they're more like take a hatchet and basically eliminate most of it and have relatively small government. Which I understand why they're upset, but the more intelligent ones are going to come in place and say, we're going to need a little regulation here, and a little bit here, a little bit here, and a little bit here.
Right, and that's the issue. There's an issue that I have, of course, with libertarian ideology, and the fact that it's, from what I can see, a lot of them try to basically they don't really go into the nuance. And Sean, you're not guilty of this because you actually use your brain.
I am guilty of it sometimes, because in reality, most of libertarian theory, or at least the Rothbardian libertarian theory,
it can't apply to everything, so you have to, you know what I mean?
But I understand most of the basics of the theory is that, or the Rothbardian libertarian theory, which was the idea that libertarians have more in common with the left than the right, is that is to explain that most of corporate power is just government power being used by corporations. Like, like the theory is that if you reduce government power, you're reducing corporate power, because the corporations use the government to control the market, restrict entry, and like all these things that we hate, like the subsidies and all that. Like that all comes from government. So the idea is if you limit the government, you'll have a fairer market, because people will be able to, have all their transactions voluntarily, and they won't have things restricted.
And
Like that's the
monopolies from
basics of
buying
it.
your government pretty much as well.
And in theory, that you could make an argument that makes sense in theory, right? But that I think that would be incredibly dangerous in practice, because corporations, what would prevent a corporation from becoming its own government, its own sort of city-state, to take that kind of power that government used to have for itself? I mean, look, if you could have private contractors, such as, I don't know, Blackwater, suddenly becoming your, basically defending a corporation because there is no government to challenge that, I find that a bit of a problem.
Well, nobody. I mean, some people do say that, but no, I'm not saying no government. I'm just saying a limited government. Obviously, police power is a part of the government. So, like, I'm not saying that we should all like start our own armies and go to war.
And that's of course why I say you're actually smarter than most of those, because I have heard, no government, get rid of the government. Government.
A lot of those people never gave it much thought, though.
And that's what I'm saying.
And to be fair, Somalia did destroy its central government, and if you look at the report that the CIA did, they actually did better after they got rid of the dictator and all the fighting stopped. Like, eventually,
get rid of a dictator. I think that's a bit of an outlier, because they had a dictator.
I understand, but eventually what happened is they realized that nobody could gain enough power to take over the country, and they worked out their own system based on common law. That's what most people would do. Like, if you got rid of the entire system, we would probably go back to English common law, which is where our laws come from. Like, that's what people tend to do when the government isn't doing their own job. You actually see that a lot in Michigan. People coming together. They're called people call them accidental libertarians, because they don't consider themselves libertarians, but they come together and they form their own communities because the police don't show up in Detroit. Like there are like, people naturally are cooperative.
Are you guys familiar with Noam Chomsky, the Harvard theologist?
Yeah.
He's a professor at MIT. He was himself described what he described libertarianism to him was that is the more of the center to left form of libertarianism he would consider the common sense party. He says it's basically common sense party and the last defenders of capitalism, basically, where you do not have any form of free market. There's no way we have a free market. The establishment of the Federal Reserve and eliminating the gold standard and going to a petrodollar and etc. He basically describes where a lot of the libertarians themselves have a lot of infighting, and a lot of the more Ayn Rand, Milton Friedmans of the Libertarian Party rather have the left of the libertarian, social libertarians, basically branch off into the independent movement, and a lot of them are doing that because a lot of left to center libertarians are not, Ayn Rand ideologues. I mean, a lot of them love their book, and I'm going to be honest, I read Atlas Shrugged. I enjoyed Atlas Shrugged. I just don't want to base my entire life off of one fiction novel.
Right, and that's the important thing to remember about Ayn Rand, that she wrote fiction.
Oh, it's incredible. Just like 1984, it's an incredible piece.
Doesn't mean it has to be an instruction manual.
But the thing about Rand and Friedman is I wouldn't put them in the same category. I mean, Friedman was a monetarist. He wasn't an Austrian, like, he wasn't really from the Austrian school, which is where I see more. I understand like they get along. Like, that's the thing. There's people who like Hayek and Friedman, but Hayek and Friedman, like, they believe a lot of similar things, but they actually disagree on the basis of money, which is incredibly important. But we're getting like pretty far off. The point is
hey, thanks for watching this video. Please leave a comment below, And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit the like button and share with your friends. If you want to see more, go to our channel at youtube.com/TYTNation. And if you really want to support the show, support this channel, go to our fundraising campaign at www.patreon.com/TYTNation. The website is in the description below. Thank you guys, and keep watching.